Hello listeners, welcome once again to another episode of 177 Nations of Tasmania. Now, for a country with a relatively small population, and that is so far away, Sweden has had perhaps a disproportionately large influence in Australia. From ABBA to Volvo, IKEA to smorgasbord, things Swedish have often captured the Australian imagination. In this interview, I'm speaking with Cecilia, who was born in Uppsala, Sweden, and who came to Tasmania in 1998 to live with her husband, Harry. In this episode, we will talk about Swedish clocks and textiles, the acquired taste for fermented Baltic herring, and her work in Antarctica for the Swedish Polar Secretariat. We also touch upon the Swedish philosophy of lagom, which infuses many aspects of Swedish life and culture, and we discuss the importance of regularly getting together with other Swedes in Tasmania to practice the Swedish language.
Well, I was born in Uppsala in Sweden. It's only about 60-70 kilometers from Stockholm, the capital, and it's inland. And well, that's where my family had just moved to there when I was born. So I didn't really have any relatives there. They were just south of Stockholm. But that became my main growing up time.
Yeah. And what do you remember about that time in Uppsala? Like, what kind of environment was it?
Well, it's a very green city, and the city was then about the same size as Hobart was in the 50s. And we lived first in the city center in some old building. But then after the war, they built a lot of new apartment buildings, 3-story high, typical Swedish apartment buildings with lots of green around them, parks for kids to play. And so we lived there for till I was about 11, and the kids could run out around there, and there were no parents looking after you. You played ball, or in the winter time you were skiing on a little mini hill just outside your house, or built these igloos in if there was good snow. So what I remember is that you compare to now, there weren't any parents anywhere around. They probably kept an eye on you from up the windows or something, I don't know. But yeah. I remember looking after other little children when I was only 6-7 years old. A neighbor who asked me to look after their little baby. So that kind of thing. Well, when you came to high school, you got different teachers. Some you liked, some you didn't like. I sort of enjoyed school. And I like to learn things, but of course it was more fun when you had homework, it was more fun to do some knitting or sewing clothes than reading your homework. But I liked it. Mm-hmm. And I liked languages. You could use that to express other things than in your own language, I think, somehow.
And what was your family background like? What did they do?
Well, my mother came from a family where her father ran shops he sold clothes and textiles, and I think you have a certain name in English, I've forgotten. And my mother, she was educated as a teacher for teaching to sew and what do you call it? You use the word slöjd in English too. But okay. So for girls it was sewing, and for boys it was carving wood and things. So she did that for a while before she married, and then of course she married, and then she didn't continue with that. She looked after the family. So my father, when I was born, he had just started in this chemical factory producing cosmetics, soap and perfumes, and so we grew up with testing new products for makeups or baths or soap and all that. So he was a chemist, you can say.
When you were at high school growing up, did you sort of have any idea of what you were going to do once you finished school?
Yes, I remember my mother thought I would be good at doing something looking after children. But then I felt I had already been looking after children early on, so I didn't like that idea much. But I liked art and I liked textile, sewing things or embroidering and making my own patterns. And so I thought I'll go to art schools. And then I knew about some art school in Switzerland. I thought that looked interesting. But then I applied for the textile school in Stockholm. And I almost got in that year, but they said I should do other things first and apply again. And then that sort of disappeared while I thought, well, maybe it's hard to live from that kind of things. And I was interested in chemistry and lab work, and I thought, well, how about if I could mix art and chemistry somehow and become a conservator? What do you say? Conservator?
Yeah, that's right.
So, and I remember my brother said, well, I'm sure you'll do well in chemistry. My friends who weren't so good at school, maybe they are now getting into the higher positions there, so you could do it too. So okay. I got into the chemistry in the university in Uppsala. And then this conservator thing disappeared and I did other things in chemistry. And so, well, you don't quite know what will happen when you're in high school, but I did have sort of feelings for doing something with art and so on. But
and how did that lead to getting into marine science, or I guess it was more river science?
Yes, well, there was the professor of liminology, which is freshwater ecology. His family was friends of our family.
Okay.
So I thought, well, how about I try to get into that? And then a friend of mine in chemistry, she was having a baby, and she said, why don't you do my job when I'm away? And she was working with water in health in Sweden. So in that way I got interested in water chemistry and health, and then I thought I'll go into this liminology studies. And then I continue with that, and then well, you never know if you can find a job in the same same thing, but well, I worked for the Geological Survey in Sweden for a bit with water analysis of groundwater. And then it was time to try to get a job. And I saw this advertisement for the Swedish Polar Research Center. And I got the job there as environmental officer. So I worked with another guy there for a while, and then I took over that job.
And what sort of things did that involve?
Well, it was about that time, just before I came, there were new regulations within the Antarctic Treaty that dealt with environmental impacts on Antarctica. And so they needed to have special people for that job. Well, Sweden had a station in Antarctica, and they did expeditions there and to the Arctic, and they needed to make sure that we followed these new regulations about how expeditions behave in these places not to damage the environment.
So was it your role to sort of measure some of these impacts?
Yes, when there was an expedition or tourist ship going to Antarctica with Swedish people, they had to apply for, we had to do the environmental impact statements. So I was involved then in checking how they were doing everything and giving permits for them to go. Oh, it was a very interesting job and getting into contact with all kinds of people. But then also I went myself then with these expeditions to do sampling or checking how it was done and making sure we did the things right in Antarctica. And
so you went to the Antarctic, the Swedish
yes,
Antarctic base?
A few times there.
And what was that like?
Well, it was quite exciting. It's not so much like for an Australian to go to Antarctica is like going to real winter, but for a Swede, it's it's sort of like going to the mountains in Sweden. But you're a small group that have to rely on each other, and hopefully you get along. So I was there for the first time for 3 months. We went from South Africa to Antarctica with a Norwegian ship. And the ship took about 2 weeks to get down where we got off. So we stepped off onto a glacier, and then you either flew in with helicopter or went with the skidoo or the bandwagons to this station up on a Nunatak, a mountain.
So it's quite a journey, really.
Yes, that's right. And I think it's important not to think too much about that you're far away and
yes.
isolated somewhere. So you just try to do your job and
what was sort of the daily routine like? Was it very much the same every day, or did it vary a bit?
We had a group of people, when my first time there, we had a group of people who were going off out on the glaciers on a transect for a few weeks. So in the beginning we were probably 30 people or something, and then suddenly we were on the station, and suddenly we were only maybe 10 or something. Well, it's sort of ordinary work. We were there in the summertime, so you walk up for a day on the Nunatak to go and see what if you find anything alive there. People don't expect any life really, but there are little water holes up on the mountain with some plants, algae in them, and there are also lichens and little tiny animals around. But otherwise, it's one thing that is important, I thought, is that you have a good expedition leader that keeps everyone together. You get up in the morning, have breakfast together and lunch together and dinner together, and people go to bed at around the same time. Otherwise, there are always people who tend to drag on through the night, and then they get up later and later in the morning, and suddenly you are sort of a few different groups that don't communicate much. And I think that's a good expedition leader keeps people together. The scientists are chosen according to their work in Sweden, and then you have medical checkups, and sometimes we have a doctor. They have a doctor with the expedition, sometimes not. And I remember I had to learn how to sew up injuries. We learned on bananas and oranges, but
really?
Fortunately I never needed to do it. So otherwise, I think in my I mean, my boss would have decided whether I could go or not, depending on what he thought about my personality. And that probably would be the same kind of thing with the scientists from different universities, that their the head of the department would say that this person is good for going or not.
Because I could imagine there'd be certain types of personalities or people who wouldn't be very well suited for that sort of environment.
Yes, that's right. But of course there are people who end up there maybe drinking too much alcohol, which is not very good. And we were fortunate, I think. They had ordered a certain amount of alcohol or wine and things for our expedition, and fortunately, rather than a pallet, or someone made a mistake and it became a box instead. So we got much less than we were supposed to have, which was probably good.
Your work with the Antarctic itself kind of led you to, in a way, indirectly to coming to Australia, didn't it?
Yes, that's right. So in my work, of course, there were always conferences about environmental impact from expeditions from all over the world. So I went to meetings to discuss new rules with other countries, or there were conferences to meet other scientists. So there was this conference in Venice about biology in Antarctica, and that's where I met my Australian husband.
And what were the circumstances of you meeting?
There was a get-together, they call it icebreaker meeting, the day before the conference starts, in a very old palace. And I didn't really know anyone else among the people, but I recognized a New Zealand scientist, and I thought, well, before I go home, I'll go back to my hotel. I'll just go and say hello to him and maybe talk to the other people around him a bit. And that was all the Australian delegation that he was talking to. And then after a while, I realized everyone else had gone, and it was only Harry and me standing there talking. And then we just liked each other, and so this was in 1994, and I remember ringing home to my administrative boss in my work in Stockholm and asking, could I please stay another few days? And she said, oh, is this work? I could hear her smiling. Oh, yes, I said. So I stayed a couple of more days and got to know Harry a little bit more. And of course, there was work too.
Yeah.
Anyway, and I knew Italy very well. As a Swedish woman, you usually had sometime in your life an Italian boyfriend.
Okay.
So I had got to know quite a bit of Italy, so I showed Harry a bit of that. Then I decided to come and visit here a few months later to see. Harry had a big family. He was a widow with 8 children, and they were not all, like Harry had said to me, there are only 2 boys at home.
So the children were mostly grown up? Or?
No, they were 12 and 15,
the
youngest. So I came here and stayed here for a few weeks, and then Harry decided to come to Sweden with the youngest boys. And I said, well, I'm going to Antarctica then when the boys had school holidays. Well, I'll come anyway, he said. I was only going for 4 weeks, but okay. So Harry came and he got to know my parents. And probably it was good, I wasn't around. And then I came here for half a year, and I did some Antarctic job for my job in Sweden together with Antarctic division here. And then I said to Harry, I think you need to come and stay in Sweden for a little longer so you understand why I am the way I am, Swedish. So he came with the youngest son for half a year. And he did some work at university there.
And did your parents tell you what their first impressions of him were?
Yes, they liked him very much. I think my father and Harry got along very well with they liked history and discussing history. And my mother, who liked art, and well, she liked Harry's personality. But of course she wasn't very happy when she realized that I was going to move here. She said, "Do you really have to marry him?" So that they were not so happy about that. I lived in the same city as they did, and I saw them almost every day. So it was probably hard for them.
When you moved to Australia, were there many cultural differences that you would say you had to adjust to?
Yes, I think so. I didn't expect it so much because I noticed that Harry and I understood each other very well, with both having sort of English influence on Australia, and after the Second World War there was a lot of English influence in Sweden. So you sort of knew the same types of things. So I thought it would be easy, but when you come to Australia, it's totally different. So people are different. You sort of notice that you don't think totally the same way.
What would you say was the biggest difference with the people, for example?
Of course, it's easier here in Australia to communicate with people you don't know. And I enjoy that. And when I go back to Sweden nowadays and I am sort of Australian there, people think I'm a bit weird sometimes. But it's also the language is, you think, as a Swede, everyone talks English, yes, but what kind of English? That's the question. And not Australian English. So it takes a while to get used to the language. With certain words are a bit difficult sometimes to understand. Like we say in English you say lake, in Australian you say like, and and English whale and Australian while, and so if you don't get those little words, you suddenly don't know what people are talking about.
Yes, and on top of the different accents and the different vocabulary, sometimes there's those cultural references that you often miss.
Yes.
And which, there'd be many examples in Australia, I
No,
guess.
that's like jokes or sayings. There was something about, I still haven't learned about... flat out like a lizard drinking. That's what I said. And I still haven't got it right because I got it wrong in the beginning.
When you initially came here to live, what were some of the challenges that you experienced at the beginning?
Well, it was Harry was working and the boys who were still at home went to school, so it was a bit hard to be on your own in the house. Before I got into working, I applied for jobs, and that's I got to interviews and so on. But it's very hard to get a job if you come from another country. And I felt that if I am going to work, I want to do something that is interesting, because that's how my life had been. So that was a bit hard in the beginning. But then I got more involved in Harry's work, and because he had a lot of projects and his boss thought he shouldn't be involved in so many, then Harry thought, well, maybe I can be allowed to come to the Antarctic division and help with some of the projects there without being employed, but I was allowed to sit there and use their facilities and people.
And what area of science was he involved with?
Well, in this case, it was he had already from the 1980s been seeing this plastic coming up on Macquarie Island and Heard Island. So he has started with some other countries, South Africa and others, to think more about checking how much plastic arrives on these islands. So he had set up projects to send out people along the beaches to look at how much, count the number of pieces and what kind of things. So that was done in the beginning every month on Macquarie Island. So there was a lot of data to put together and see if it had been changing through the years, and then compare with other countries' projects. And then further on, we had some people going down to for 3 months to go out every day on these windy beaches and rainy, windy beaches and collect anything they could find and report that to Harry and me then, and we have been writing things about those surveys. So that was the kind of thing I was doing then. Now we are retired, but we continue to work from home. Mm-hmm. It's always interesting to be able to continue with your work when you retire, if you have a chance. We have published in different journals, so other people have been, can read the studies and do the same kinds of things or compare with our work. It was about finding plastic, very small plastic pieces in seal poo.
Yeah.
So that would have been plastic that fish had been eating, and then the seal had eaten the fish.
Yeah, well, it's certainly an issue that's become bigger and bigger and become higher in people's consciousness, I suppose.
Yes, that's right. So early on, when I came here, Harry had always been a member of the Tasmanian Historical Association, THRA. And we used to go to talks there. And there was this woman, Caroline something, that had come up with an idea for the Tasmanian bicentennial something, to put together something about migrants to Tasmania. And so I told her I was very interested. There was also she had then a friend who was an artist. And finally it was decided that we'll get some little groups of people from Tasmania who could tell something about either their ancestors coming to Tasmania or, like me, coming themselves, and bring something that was related to this person's arrival or being here. And so we got together, and I remember someone bringing the great-grandmother's glasses or something like that, and someone brought someone's white handkerchief that they had used when they waved goodbye to England or something. And so we sat there and everyone talked a bit, and it was very emotional. You could feel tears coming. And then the artist, she had planned a quilt, so everyone should get a piece to put together their thoughts about this coming to Tasmania, whether yourself or your ancestor. And we got a lot of fabric, different to choose from. And then we went home and started making something, and then we got together again and worked together and helped each other to get every piece ready. And when we had the pieces ready, then this artist, she had been in contact with some Aboriginal women who had designed how this quilt should look like. So they had suggested some sort of river flowing through this pattern. And then we all got together and put all these pieces together into a big quilt. It was a nice thing just to be together and sit there sewing, and it turned out very beautiful, I think.
And what was your contribution? What did you put to represent?
Oh yes, one thing I miss here is the lakes that I go swimming in lakes or rowing or sailing on lakes. So I remember I had a lake and I had birch trees. They are very Swedish, and some little red cottage, and then which is very Swedish, and blue anemones that are the spring flowers in Sweden. And then I sort of connected with putting Harry's family somehow in this with my family, something to connect it to Tasmania.
And what for you are some of the most important or precious objects that you still have from Sweden?
Whew. Well, I still have little things from when I matriculated. And in Sweden, when you finish school, you have big family party and you get presents. So I still have little things from that time, and I like to look at those and use them. So suddenly there is a glass I got. Oh, look at this, I got this then, and it's nice to think back like this. I guess I like to think of old things. And the rags that I showed you, I like to have them. Some of them I made myself when I was a teenager.
And are they are they distinctively Swedish style of rug?
Yes, they might have them in Finland and Norway as well, but it's very common in Sweden, both in your city apartment or in your cottage you go to in the summer. And they are made from your old clothes or old sheets and things you cut up in long strips and then weave them together in a loom. Now that's very Swedish, and nowadays I think they have been very expensive people go around in the country and ask to go into the attics and look for them.
Right.
And pay a lot of money for them.
Wow. And of course, I have to ask you about all the clocks that, especially,
Yes,
but especially the Swedish clocks, because they're quite distinctive, aren't they?
Yes, that's right. Well, Harry is very keen on clocks nowadays. When he came to Sweden and we visited people, he would have seen this so-called Mora clock. And Mora is a town up further north, sort of middle of Sweden. And in the winter time, when they could not work outside in the fields, this special area of Sweden, they were very well known for producing things that they could sell. And I think the women often put on their folk costume and then traveled or walked down to Stockholm and areas to sell these things. And among the things were these clocks. So we have one one old clock. The clockwork is from probably 1800 something, but the case is newer now, but it's made in the same way as they used to, and the clocks used to be called bridal clocks, and they have the sort of the curves of a woman, and they are taller like a person, and then they are decorated with flowers, and they can be sort of white or a special kind of blue, or like ours is wood colored, and then at the top is often sort of a crown or flowers, or like the bride would have had. So I'd say that they were made for when someone got married. They got a clock which would then go through the generations. So you find these clocks I have friends who have them from their probably grandparents or great-grandparents.
I remember reading a book about Swedish culture and customs or something, and there was some concept, there was some word in Swedish which was roughly translated as moderation, which was said to be...
Oh, yeah, lagom.
Yeah, maybe that's...
Harry, he uses that word. It means just right.
Uh-huh.
So how much do you want? Oh, just the right amount, lagom. And then I have to decide what is just right for you. So, but and that is used in many circumstances, I guess. And what is the speed on the road? Well, it could be lagom. That means not too fast, not too slow.
Because that seems to be the Swedish philosophy, to be just right, not to be too extreme on either way.
Yeah, you shouldn't be extreme in Sweden. That's right.
I've just got one sort of, I suppose it's a random fun question, let's call it. And I think of this because I've seen lots of videos of people on like trying the Swedish, is it surströmming?
Yes, the fermented herring. Yes.
Yes, because it seems like a very strong... I've never smelt or tasted, but just judging from people's reactions, it's quite a strong taste.
Yes, that's right. Well, it's what do you say? That's a cultural thing from the north of Sweden.
Uh-huh.
And it was out on the islands up the Baltic. They would need to do something with the fish to keep it for the winter time. So yes, there are certain islands where they prepare this fish, and I like it a lot. And we used to have the custom it starts on 11th of September. So then you get together with friends. You sit outside mainly because the smell is very strong.
So I gather.
Or if you are inside, you'll feel the smell long after. And at the university, the institute, we used to have this because there were quite a few people who liked it. But the professor, he hated it. He thought back to when he was young, and they were sitting on the veranda and the big flies came.
Okay.
So he always went home when we had this party in the building. And I was going to demonstrate this for Harry, of course. So I made the mistake of, you get them in tins, and if the tin is sort of a bit swollen, then you know it's a good fish. So then you take it outside, and you have a nail on a stick, and then you hit the tin with the stick, and you get this smell. And of course I like that, but Harry, he's always terrible. So he doesn't want to eat it. And I can tell you what the smell is like, because I once here in Tasmania, Harry was called to come with his students to take care of a seal that had been shot on the Primrose Sand. They had found it there. And Harry and his students, they took samples from the seals for their research. So we went out there, and one of the students was going to open this seal to get liver and things, I guess. So I was watching, and then he opened it, and this fantastic smell came out, and fantastic. And then everyone else went away, and I went closer because it smelled just like the fermented herring. Surströmming means sour herring.
So that's something very, I think every country has their very distinctive thing that only people from there understand and appreciate.
Yes, that's right, yes. Or you have to be, if you are a visitor, you have to be very special or very in your ways to accept it, I guess.
Yes. You do get together sometimes with other Swedes in Hobart?
Yes, so that was a long time ago. My friend Kristina Hedin, she had come here earlier than I did and married Richie out in near Richmond and on a farm there. And she knew some Swedes. There was a Swedish woman who was involved in the Migrants Resource Center, Barbara. And they thought we should try, and there was the Scandinavian club. We used to go there, but then it became sort of not quite the way we Swedish women wanted it, or Swedes wanted it. So we started, I think it was Kristina who started this group. So we have been going home to each other for several years now. So we try to meet every other month it started out a lot of exchanging Swedish books, because we always said, anyone who goes to Sweden, come home with some books.
Mm-hmm.
So we have borrowed from each other, which has been very good. Now it becomes more just talking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was going to ask whether it was a chance to speak Swedish.
Yes, and I think I noticed already then when Barbara was in our group. When I met her earlier, her Swedish wasn't so good. But then when we had met a few times, I noticed her Swedish was getting better. So I think it's quite good that we can get together like that and just chat in Swedish. So we don't want anyone who can't speak Swedish to come.
Is there anything that you still miss about, say, Swedish culture, for example?
Yes, I like to be out and about in the forest. And my brother rang the other day and said, "Oh, Cecilia, I have gone back to that place we used to go and pick mushrooms, and I found the ones you found, the black trumpet mushroom." And then you sort of long for going back to Sweden and pick mushrooms in the autumn. I think it's more common in Swedish culture to be with the whole family or out and about in the forest, but that has changed, of course, now with kids wanting to sit inside with their computers, I think. So it probably changed there a bit.